everyone, this is Muqbil Ahmar, Executive Editor, Greyhead Media and DynamicCIO. And today I'm joined by Nick Savvides, Senior Director, Strategic Business Asia Pacific Forcepoint. The topic at hand today is the current state of cybersecurity and the road ahead. What does the ideal cybersecurity system look like if IT and business leaders were in a position to design it up from the grounds up? Welcome to the show, Nick. I seriously and really, I hope that you are doing well as your family members.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to meet you, and thank you for having me on the show.
So, Nick, the first question that comes to my mind is that cybercrime has really increased during the lockdown period, which we see being implemented across the world in fits and starts, and in consistency at some places. This is despite the fact that companies have invested significant resources in getting sophisticated controls to protect people, brand, and assets from cyber criminals. How do you see the threat landscape evolving?
Well, I think that cybercrime is not something that's going to ever go away. It is the new world. Prior to computing and prior to networks, we always had crime, and criminals go where there is money, and money right now is in cyberspace. We are all connected. We all use computing, and our lives without computing would be very, very different. And I would dare say that in the current scenario worldwide, without the ability to collaborate online, without the ability to digitize our businesses, the world's economic output would be even further significantly impacted. And cyber criminals will go where the money is. So that's why they are going online. And they never let an opportunity go to waste. And the current scenario is just another opportunity for them. They run businesses. These are organized. They are smart people who run very, very sophisticated operations. They know what they're doing, and they understand human psychology. And the tooling that people have, industry in general has spent millions and billions of dollars on cybersecurity over the last 30 years. And we've continued to improve that and improve cybersecurity. But the attackers continue to improve their operations. They continue to improve their tactics, their tooling, and their procedures. What's been most interesting, I think, is that attackers have moved to attacking humans versus the infrastructure itself, because the level of sophistication of security in infrastructure has become quite good. So it's often easier to attack the human than it is to attack the infrastructure. Get the human to do something bad on their behalf. Right? So I think this problem's only ever going to get worse, because it will continue to attract more and more criminals into cybercrime.
Right. So this is a pretty grim picture that you paint, Nick. And you are also saying that attackers have started targeting humans rather than infrastructure. So this brings me to my second question, which is that businesses face unprecedented pressure due to the lockdown. And with work from home becoming the new normal, there is suddenly a big spike in digital traffic.
Correct.
This surely needs a robust and secure infrastructure. So, Nick, to your mind, what are the unique challenges that organizations are facing these days?
So that's a very good question, and you are absolutely right. We are all, many jobs are now working from home. Many people are working from home, and the security models that we had were all based around protecting the infrastructure. So the idea that I have an employee, they're in the office, here are my systems, here are my computers, my applications, this is my network. And the entire security paradigm has been about building circles, concentric rings of security. I control the network. I put boundaries up around the network. Here, I control the application. I put boundaries around the application. I control the endpoint, the device that the user is utilizing. So I put a boundary around that. The problem that you have is that in this modern world, and now with people having to work from home, it has shown that we've had to digitize more rapidly. So you've seen organizations have those borders break down. There is no corporate network when your user is at home and they're accessing a cloud service. They're using their own internet. They're using probably their own device. They're using the service delivered via the cloud. Where is the corporate boundary? Where are your traditional controls? So I think the biggest challenge that organizations face is making that pivot away from trying to secure the systems to trying to secure the users, and also moving from a reactive model to a proactive model. A lot of cybersecurity, not just the technologies, but the processes that organizations have, the way they run their security operations centers, the way they run their response, has all been reactive. This has happened. We have to go and clean that up. We've got to investigate this and prevent it from getting worse. I think cybersecurity needs to evolve to be, the phrase is left of bang, right? And to take a military term, I like to use more of the DevOps mentality, where we are shifting left. We're moving further left before the incident. So we're moving to a proactive model that can actually predict an incident or something bad happening, and allows us to prevent it from ever occurring, as opposed to reacting to it once it has occurred. And a friend of mine's a doctor, and they always say, prevention is better than cure. And truer words have never been spoken right now as a result of the current situation we're all in. But
Correct.
I think that applies to cybersecurity as well. I think that applies to cybersecurity.
Sure. I absolutely agree with you that a proactive, posture is what is required in the present times, and it is very essential for organizations, individuals, and everybody to actually go out of a reactive mode. So, coming on to my next question,
yes.
Nick, it is about the recent survey that Forcepoint conducted among 200 C-suite executives in partnership with WSJ Intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And the survey explored the current state of cybersecurity and what the ideal cybersecurity system should be.
Yeah.
So it would be great if you could share some insights from that survey, some really, some very important points.
Yeah. So look, it's a really good survey, and I actually found the results very interesting and also somewhat surprising. And the reason I say surprising is that I think here in our part of the world, the results weren't consistent with what I was expecting. If you look at the rest of the world, so the Americas and Europe, the survey asked what would be your ideal cybersecurity paradigm if you were starting from scratch, if you could do anything. And nearly everyone said in those regions, well, I'd want a proactive approach. I'd want something that takes me to a position where I'm not reactive and I am proactive, and that I understand what my people and my users are doing. But in our part of the world, the results were very interesting in that it was the other way around. A lot of organizations still thought here that their approach would be to be very threat-centric, as opposed to, and what I mean by that is they're dealing with threats, not with people. So that it's still a very reactive approach. And that concerned me about our part of the world. And that, to me, was one of the most interesting findings in the results of the survey, because it showed me that the maturity of cybersecurity is still evolving here. When you have difficulty handling threats today, you aren't as ready to deal with the bigger problems. So you're still trying to get your baseline. So what it told me was that the respondents in our market are still trying to improve the baseline before they actually deal with the higher level problems that everyone else is suffering with. But the cyber criminals don't care. They don't care that you're still down here and you're trying to get up. They will use whatever mechanism works for them. And right now, that is going after people. And I thought, to me, that was one of the most interesting things that came out of the report. And it was a very, very interesting report, because not only did it highlight that our market and our region here, I think, is still dealing with those threat-centric issues, they're not thinking far enough into the future about how what their cybersecurity journey is going to look like. I think we're too busy putting out fires here to be thinking strategically, right? And that's what happens. When you're too busy trying to deal with your day-to-day, you never deal with your tactical responses. You're too busy to deal with the strategic outcomes. And that's a big risk. And what it highlighted to me was digital transformation and the digitization of businesses has accelerated during this time of the pandemic, the global issue that we are all facing, because we've had to change the way our businesses operate. And I think if you ran the survey again, I think we'd get different results. I think we'd get different results because it's forcing everyone to look back and say, I have to take a risk-based approach. I have to take a proactive approach. I can't just be threat-centric, because those models don't work in this new world.
So I think wonderfully put, Nick, that a threat-centric approach in today's world is not enough, and organizations and businesses really need to start getting more proactive. So this brings me to another section of the attacks or the targets. So recently, the Australian government revealed that a state-based cyber actor launched sophisticated cyber attacks against Australian public and private sector institutions.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the evolving nature of cyber warfare?
Well, cyber activities follow geopolitical lines. So there will always be cyber activity along those lines. What I think, though, that everyone can take out of that is that cybersecurity is a serious issue, and it is the new battleground. It's the new battleground. And it is so serious that if you think about what can happen, if you compromise not just a company, but a nation's operations, you could cripple an economy. You could cripple a business. You could cripple a region. It is an existential threat to a lot of organizations. And the more digitized we become and dependent on technology we become, cybersecurity will play a bigger and bigger role. So I think what came out of that announcement to me was that this is a very public message that everyone needs to take cybersecurity seriously, and that there are sophisticated actors who will do anything, who are not bound by rules, who are not bound by laws, who are not bound by ethics, who will do anything to achieve their goals. And that, I think, is the biggest lesson to come out of that. Also, interestingly, if you read the report that went along with it, that came out of the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, a lot of the mechanisms were focused on attacking people. And that is
right.
the idea that the people are the weakest part. Because one of the things that I talk a lot about is the evolution of computing. You know, in the old days, you had a computer and it had a punch card reader, and people would turn up and they'd feed their punch cards in and they used the computer. That's how you programmed it. It was one person at a time. Then the computers got more sophisticated and you had time slicing. So people could submit their jobs to the computer and it would do a little bit of this one, a little bit of that job. That was the old world, and computing has completely evolved. We went through, mainframe architectures, centralized computing, client server architecture. Then we started to virtualize computers. We started to put them in the cloud. Everything has changed. Computing today is very, very different to computing 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. When I started my career, I was hand building servers, right? Installing the operating system, installing Linux and custom compiling device drivers to make things work, to run a database or to run a piece of scientific software. Now, today, that's abstract. You don't do that. You launch an application. It runs in containers and it's microservices and all of this. The architecture and administration of systems has changed completely, and the way we interact with them has changed completely. The web and web interface has taken over most applications. The one thing that's remained consistent, though, is the user. No matter what happens on the computer side, there is always a user, me, interacting with a computer, always. Now, the big threat comes then if that infrastructure continues to change, and it will continue to change as we go into the future. I should worry about protecting that user. Because if you read that report, a lot of the attacks were against people. And why are they against people? Because I can bypass effectively all of the cybersecurity controls if I can, as an attacker, if an attacker can get someone's username, password, multi-factor token, or authentication token, they can become that person. So then it becomes an abuse of that someone's access. And none of the threats or the infrastructure security is going to protect you there. Because all of a sudden, the attacker is now an authorized user. And you can see that in that report, how the attacks were against people in order to get them to hand over their credentials, to hand over that information, to give these attackers authorized access. Very concerning.
Absolutely. Very well put, Nick. I think you have spoken very well about how, the landscape of technology itself has evolved tremendously and continues to evolve in the future. And so this brings me to some of my other thoughts, which are that, as you rightly pointed out, that as technologies and security precautions become more sophisticated, and so cyber criminals are now finding and using new tactics for attacks. So in such a case, where does the road end for organizations, especially in this cat and mouse situation?
Yeah, I think the road doesn't end. It doesn't end. There's no one and done, right? Well, I sometimes, before we got locked down, I have a young boy. He's my son is nearly 7 years old, and we'd go and visit friends 4 hours away. And he'd sit in the car. And we're driving along, and you hear, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" I'd say to him, The journey of getting there is part of the weekend away. It's part of the holiday. The journey is part of it.
Correct.
And I think cybersecurity feels like that. We're all looking for a solution to solve all our problems. But I think that that's not going to happen. I think what we need to do is ensure that we are on that journey and that we recognize there is no end, but what we can do is make the journey more pleasant to protect us from those attackers. And that involves that pivot, as I said, away from worrying about protecting the systems and pivoting towards protecting the user and the data. That's probably more important. I think it's the only way to build a future-proof scenario, because it allows you to address the changes in computing. I also think that taking a predictive approach is important, but also to have automation. And the reason I say automation is there aren't enough cybersecurity professionals in the world today to deal with all of the cybersecurity issues. And if you're being attacked, you can have your entire team working on an incident, and another incident may occur and you not notice that, and it gets through. That is successful. That attacker is successful because you're too busy dealing with the other incident. You don't have the resources to scale. So I think a automated approach also needs to be top of mind, where you have automated responses for as much as possible. So when you run a security operations center, you have playbooks for what's going to happen. This happens, then my analyst is going to go do this, and this. This is my playbook for that. I think the part of it is not just pivoting to being human-centric, user-centric, data-centric. It's also about understanding that I want to be able to automate my responses as much as possible so that my humans who are doing my cybersecurity practice, who are running my cybersecurity practice, can focus on the higher order functions, on the higher, bigger problems, because their time is not being taken up by dealing with all these minor things that could flood them. So automate as much as possible. Make it reactive so that you don't try and be in a binary state. So, computers are all about ones and zeros. Unless you're talking about quantum computers. That's my background. I was at Melbourne Uni, I studied physics, worked at the Centre for Excellence for Quantum Computing Technology. So unless you're talking about a quantum computer, we're talking about bits, ones or zeros, binary states. But and a lot of cybersecurity software works in that way. This is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. When it comes to interaction with a user, a lot of security software and systems operate with, you can do this, you can't do that. You can do this, you can't do that. What that does is because of its binary nature, it gets in the way of people who are doing the right thing, but they're not doing it in the right way.
Right.
We need to have a non-binary response that adapts to what the user is doing, that can say, this user is okay, they're behaving the right way, so I'm going to let them do this. But I'm going to keep watch. And if something else comes, if I see behavior that I don't like, or I think is indication that something wrong is happening here, something bad is happening here, I'm not going to block. I'm not going to stop that user from doing that, but I'm going to warn them, or I'm going to slow down their access. I'm going to make their access read only, or I'm going to prevent them from doing some action, not all action.
Correct.
Until you get to a point where the risk is so great, you can say, all right, now I've flipped into that binary, I've blocked state. So we have a spectrum of responses. Now you can't have a human making that judgment. You can't. There are no. You can't have one person watching all your users. They'd go crazy, right?
True,
There's
true,
no
true.
way they could keep up.
Very well put, Nick. I would say that your entire doctrine that cybersecurity is a journey is actually very pertinent and true, and that the world needs more automation, especially in the field of cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
This brings me to the last question of this interview. So, Nick, can you help us? Can you tell us how you can help, cybersecurity and infosec professionals keep their own organizations safe and secure? And how can those gaps in the security posture of organizations be filled?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I'll start off by answering that as to why I joined Forcepoint. I have been thinking about these problems over the last few years in my previous roles and in my experience as a cybersecurity practitioner and leader. And I joined Forcepoint because I believed that their technology was rapidly changing to adapt to this threat. They had strengths in this area, and I joined the organization because I thought they are in the right direction. So that was why I joined. And then I've come to the company and I found, fortunately I was right. So we have a very very good capability here that allows our users of our technologies to really start on that journey, and no matter where they are in their maturity, because they can be immature cybersecurity organizations or mature cybersecurity organizations, anywhere they are on that journey, to get the right outcomes. Because what we are doing is we're investing a lot in data science, in behavioral analytics, in understanding not just cybersecurity, but the way people use their systems, the way they interact with computing. And we're building that into our offerings. So there are two big approaches that we are taking. If I think about access to systems, those systems now are moving into the cloud. Those applications are moving into the cloud. So you have software as a service, you have infrastructure as a service running your applications. Most organizations, though, are not going to be 100% cloud. They're going to have legacy apps running in their data centers. So how do you secure this? How do you build a system that has all of that cybersecurity stack in front of those systems? Why do I want it in front of those systems? Because the data is going to live there. So I actually don't want it in front of the system. I want it in front of the data. So what's happened is the legacy approach would be to have separate systems of separate cybersecurity stacks to protect those. What we're doing is we're building what's called a SASE edge, a secure access service edge, where we have a single view, a single stack that allows us to have one unified cybersecurity stack across those software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and legacy applications presented to the user in the same way. So the end user feels like they're in the office. They feel like all the applications are just there for them. But there's no VPN. There's no special hoops they have to go through. The entire security stack is protecting them and is essentially transparent to the user. And it doesn't matter where the application or where the data lives. The same level of protection to the data applies. So that's the one side of it. The other side is protecting the user. So understanding what that user is doing on their endpoint, how they're interacting with the system. So if we protect the data on the edge there, we're doing that with what we call our dynamic edge protection, with cloud security gateway for your internet access, your infrastructure as a service and your software as a service applications, and what we call private access for your internal applications. And then on the that forms our dynamic edge protection. And then on the other side is, well, let's actually protect the data that's on that the user is working with and that user themselves. So make sure that the user can only use the data in the appropriate way, but go beyond that.
Correct.
Understand how they're using it, what they're doing, and understand their behavior, and then feed that into both systems so that we get that automation and that dynamic response. And that's what we're building. That's how we're doing that. We are elevating cybersecurity to be human-centric, that protects the user and protects the data no matter where the user is, whether they're at home, in the office, in a hotel, if they're still able to travel, and the data, no matter where it is, whether it's inside that organization's data center or whether it's in a cloud service. So to me, I think that's why I think we've got a winning strategy, and why we as a company we're taking these technologies that we already have and adapting them, not just adapting them for the new world, but building new capabilities that are native to that new world. And that's what I really like. So that to me is the how I think we are addressing that problem. That's what keeps me busy.
Yes, I would agree completely with you that automation, predictive analytics, behavioral analytics, these are these have to be integral parts of any proper cybersecurity strategy to counter the threats, and especially the keeping in view that the threat landscape is evolving so much.
Yeah.
It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Nick, today. And we had a lovely session where you really put across a lot of very important trends and, the current state of cybersecurity. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It was lovely to speak to you, and good luck and stay safe.